You're listening to Forward, a podcast from faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, hosted by Michelle Knight, Josh Jipp, Madison Pierce, and James Arcadi. Forward invites listeners into the mission of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School through conversations with faculty, staff, and guests.
Welcome to Forward, a TEDS faculty podcast. We are excited for this summer installment of our podcast here. We obviously had a season in the spring semester. We touched base with a lot of our colleagues on a wide range of topics and issues. We're looking forward to a fall season as well. We're going to have our regular rotation going on in the fall. We also thought it'd be cool just to do a couple of quick episodes here in the summertime, check in with the hosts, and kind of see what we're up to and maintain that connectivity with one another and with our listeners as well. So I'm James Arcadi. I'm excited to be here. We also have...
I'm Josh Jipp, and good to be here back with you again as well. James, it's good to see you. It feels like it's been a long time since we've checked in with each other. What's life been like for you now that the semester's about a month and a half been finished? What's life been like at the Arcadi household?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, for me, it felt like the semester never really kind of ended. Rightfully, I had a lot of students got extensions and everything because of the pandemic, which was fine. That just meant like my grading kind of like kept going further and further and further into the summer. So in some ways, I'm not quite sure when the transition ever happened, if it has happened from spring to summer, but maybe that's kind of, chronology in the pandemic era anyway.
Yeah.
We'll update the listeners on one little tidbit here, and I think you can relate this as well. So we did end up getting a dog. That actually happened. We've got a 1-year-old beagle mix.
Congratulations!
And he's currently making his way into our family. And you yourself have done something similar. Is that right?
We did. Yeah, we got a golden retriever puppy, 8 weeks old. His name's Buxton. Here, let me call him over. Buxton! Buxton! He's sleeping. He sleeps a lot. So sorry. He's I guess would be about 11 weeks now. So he's been a lot of fun and a lot of work, and feels like having a baby again in terms of even rearranging some of our sleep habits.
Oh yeah. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Thankfully, our guy is like, I feel like I'm talking like a baby. Our guy is like sleeping through the night. He just gets up really early, and we're trying to encourage him to sleep in a little bit. Yeah.
No, I see my neighbor every morning who works a night shift and then comes in at about 5:30, and I'm out in our backyard reading, and he's like, "Oh, you're out here." I'm like, "Yep, the dog."
Yeah, the dog. Yeah.
Yeah,
that is kind of a fun. I mean, it's speaking of that kind of that social aspect of things. It's been kind of like taking the dog on walks, and like all of a sudden, like there are dog people all over the place that I didn't really know about, and taking the dog out on walks and getting to chat with neighbors and that sort of thing. And I mean, that's kind of cool. I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, it's definitely happened for us too. Yeah, everybody wants to pet the little puppy.
Yeah, for sure. But it's been a fair amount of work. I think I'm still on the edge of like if the work is worth it for like what the dog actually gives to me.
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
My wife was sharing with me some of these studies that talk about kids and the role that dogs have in terms of just their own development psychologically, emotionally, and so forth. I don't know. I mean, I can't fully confirm that or not. But I had a dog, and I think it contributed to the person that you see today. So hopefully
I was having a conversation with the dog the other day where I was petting him, and I was asking him whether or not he was contributing to my mental well-being. He didn't give a firm answer, but we'll see as the experiment goes on if somehow I become more, better adjusted, or my kids are as well. But anyway, so that's kind of a little bit what's going on with me, and it sounds like you have as well. How about yourself? Anything going on the last month or so since we finished up?
Yeah, that's the big thing. We took a trip 2 weeks to go see my family in Iowa. We were on the farm. It was good to have some space to be able to run around and kids see their grandparents. But right now we're just trying to get into some sort of summer rhythm and routine, despite a lot of the normal activities being canceled, like swimming pool and day camps and so forth. So fortunately, we're still going to be able to do baseball, but even that looks a little different coaching with masks on and so forth. But
Yeah.
but yeah, we're getting there. We're getting into a routine, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all making it work. Well, we talked about just kind of doing a little check-in right now, especially on some of the things that we are working on or kind of like thinking about. You yourself in the fall are going to be working, well, you'll be at TEDS, but you'll be in a different role at TEDS. Maybe you could share a little bit about
Sure.
what that role is going to be, and then we can get to talk a bit more about how you're thinking about that for the fall and the spring as well.
Yeah, so I applied to be a fellow at the Henry Center. Which, as you said, located at TEDS, funded by, at least for the Creation Project, funded by Templeton, the Templeton Foundation. So I applied to be a resident fellow. The theme has to do with basically uniting the natural order and the moral order, especially as it pertains to questions related to the good. So, yeah, I submitted a proposal to be a fellow working on a project that has to do with Paul, ancient philosophy, positive psychology, looking at versions of the good life, and I will be on research leave next year. Although I'll probably be at the Henry Center. I'll be on campus probably more than I am in a normal academic year. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, I would just love to hear a little bit more about this project. So I think you kind of just mentioned there, it's sort of like a three-way intersection. Is that right? Kind of Paul, ancient philosophy, and like contemporary positive psychology.
Yeah.
Is that so? How do you sort of? I mean, how did you get into this? How did you get into this sort of interdisciplinary, conception
Right.
here, being a New Testament scholar?
Yeah, there's a few different ways I feel like I could come at that, but it mostly centers upon some dissatisfaction with how Pauline theology is often done, which is usually only under, when New Testament scholars do it, it's almost only done under sort of thematic doctrinal loci that usually come from systematic theology, which can be illuminating, and I'm not opposed to it per se. Or sometimes it's just done in terms of books, Romans, Galatians, the Corinthian correspondence, and so forth. But all of those forms, I often think, fail to capture the way in which Paul's theological writings give to us, basically what they are teachings and discourses into living a particular way of life. And so it's hard for anybody to capture that in academic writing or any kind of writing. But some of the projects started with a dissatisfaction with the way Paul's theology was just a bit overly formal. So I want to try to recapture the way in which Paul is a passionate participant in the ancient quests for the meaning of human. What is the good life? What does it mean to live life well? And so then,
can I just on the point that just in terms of like kind of the framing the projects, if I'm understanding correctly, it's kind of like sometime maybe traditionally we kind of come to Paul theologically with particular doctrinal loci in mind, but you're sort of asking the question. Well, are you asking the question? Well, what if we come to Paul thinking like, what's like the practical outflow, or like how is he commending a particular vision of the human life? Is that kind of more what the telos is?
To some extent, yeah. I think Paul I'm not against Paul being portrayed as a theologian. He's obviously a theologian that speaks and writes about God, right? But I don't think it's best to think of him as a theologian in the sense that we often think, that he is sitting down, working through, challenging issues and then penning these missives. I don't think that's as helpful as thinking of basically he is someone who has been grasped by Christ. Christ has reoriented and now determines the meaning of human existence, and he then is teaching these little communities and churches what it means to value Christ as their supreme good and conformity to him as their supreme good, and then what that might look like as it pertains to use the word you used, really practical, on the ground kinds of issues, like what does it mean to handle adversity well? When things don't go my way, what are the appropriate emotions, and not just when things don't go my way, but how do I handle suffering and death? what things should I cultivate an inner emotional life, or are emotions to be eradicated? Some of these kinds of questions. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's super fascinating. And are you seeing this as more in continuity or discontinuity with other sort of philosophers or, ancient philosophies, either in
Yeah.
Paul's day or prior to Paul?
Yeah. Yeah, I think in some ways Paul is really different. Just as I'm, trying to articulate what is the supreme good from which Paul's theology flows. Like, is there a telos or eudaimonia, as the ancient philosophers would call it? And as Paul is positing that, I think primarily as a person, Christ, and therefore for humanity knowing him, being conformed to him, being related to him, that's really strange and unusual when you compare that to, say, Epicureans who would posit pleasure, or Stoics who would, posit the life of reason, rationality, virtue. There's maybe a little more continuity with some Platonist thinkers and so forth, but there's a way in which he's really different and unusual, and yet there's a way in which he's addressing some of the exact same themes and questions and topics that ancient philosophers were engaging as well. So,
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So you got the biblical scholar component in that you're mining Paul and his letters. You got the kind of ancient philosophical background where you're showing him as participating in a similar conversation, but doing so in a radically different way to some extent.
Yeah.
But then what's this like positive psychology piece that you're also trying to bring into the conversation?
Yeah.
I don't even know what positive psychology is really,
sure.
I guess. I'm ignorant on that.
Yeah, so positive psychology is a movement that started obviously within psychology maybe 20, 30 years ago by Martin Seligman's sort of the poster child for the origins of the movement. But to make a long story short, basically it starts out of saying psychology has treated people basically as illnesses. They deal with pathologies. So when something goes wrong with the human individual, psychology tries to step in and determine what is the illness, how do we diagnose it, and how do we move that person back into a state of health. Positive psychology is saying, okay, that can be helpful and useful for some in some instances, but psychology can offer more. It can actually contribute to this question: what does it mean to live a good life? How do we build positive, enduring institutions? How do we cultivate good work or work relationships? I mean, on and on, all the things that you might think of that pertain to living a full, robust, good life. Positive psychology is engaging in empirical data collecting, trying then to determine, what are practical strategies for people to live well. Maybe just two other quick things I'll say about it. One of the things that causes me to be really fascinated by it is, in so many ways, they're not engaging religion or theology, and in fact are often opposed to having a transcendent norm. So the natural, right, in the Henry Center theme year sort of language, they in fact see that as positive because it's sort of hey, you can take this, whether you're Christian or Buddhist or atheist or whatever you are, and use these insights in a way to improve your life. And I want to sort of look at that and say, is that possible? Can we actually have good conversations about the meaning of life and virtue and morality and emotions when we don't have any sort of transcendent framework or natural grounding? So that's one other thing. Last thing I'll say, I know I'm talking a while here, is
no, that's cool.
It's really prevalent. It is it doesn't always go now by the name of positive psychology, but it has financial backing that is unbelievable. So if you go and look at some of the most well-known, well-received TED Talks, or you go to Barnes and Noble and look at, who are the people that are contributing questions about what it means to get along with our neighbors in a hostile political climate or whatever it is. Often these are people that are coming out of positive psychology. So, so I hope and I think it's worth engaging, not only as a contemporary analog to a quest for the good life, but also as something that's prevalent in our culture today as well.
Yeah, totally. That sounds really fascinating. And I mean, don't want to push it too hard, but just trying to understand. So is the idea to kind of take Paul and insert him into the positive psychology sort of framework, or is it to take Paul as a pushback to something similar but maybe different, or kind of how do you see? Maybe it's too early to say, but how do you kind of see that intersection point between those two specifically?
Yeah, I think in some ways it will be similar to how it works out with Paul and the ancient philosophers. They're all three of them are having a robust conversation about sort of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to live well? What is humanity? What does it mean to live a good life? All of them, and therefore, right? They have similar topics and questions that they're engaged in. But I don't want any one of those, but I think all three of those have pretty radically different answers and ways of going methodologically sort of going about how they articulate what the good life is. So not trying to argue Paul's a proto, positive psychologist, 2,000 years beforehand, but that here are three different movements, similar conversation, different ways of going about it. Let's try to unpack them. And I'll say it a little bit flippantly, but then you can decide, you can choose which version of the good life is the best one, So
choose your own adventure, choose your own good life. Is that what it is there?
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's super fascinating. I'm really excited to hear kind of how that, begins to develop over the next course of the year. And I hope you'll, continue to update us on your research there.
Yeah, likewise. How about you, James? What have you been working on this summer? I know you've had a couple of projects underway. Do you want to share a little bit with us about one of them?
Yeah, I suppose one of the bigger ones that is in its final stages or just about wrapping up right now is I've been editing a fairly large volume, co-editing a large volume on analytic theology. So this will be the T&T Clark Handbook to Analytic Theology that I'm co-editing with Dr. J.T. Turner down at Anderson University.
Okay.
So it's got about 39 essays or so, where we try to where each essay touches on a topic in systematic theology, some of the standard loci in systematic theology, but does so from an analytic theology perspective. And so they each of the essays offer a bit of a summary of the conversation where applicable to that particular doctrine, and then usually kind of convey a little bit of a constructive picture as well on whatever topic it might be. Trinity, incarnation, atonement, those kinds of things as well. So yeah, it's in the final stages. So we're still kind of polishing off some aspects of that, and that's been a really exciting project.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations, first of all. I'm going to give you a softball, but it's a genuine question.
Sure.
Just tee it up for you here. What exactly is analytic theology?
Yeah, analytic theology. Great question. $1 million question at times. I tend to have more of kind of like a deflationary account or a simple account. I mean, theology is just talking about God, and systematic theology is just talking about God on, according to the standard shape that we get from Scripture and the standard doctrines we cover. The analytic in analytic theology refers to the analytic philosophical tradition. And so I think analytic theology is just doing theology, borrowing tools from, borrowing sensibilities of, or being in kind of some kind of conversation with some of the analytic philosophical tradition. And so I kind of talk about it like sort of an age-old conversation between theology and philosophy that's been going on, forever. And if you got your Augustine, you got Neoplatonism, you got Aquinas, you got Aristotle, Calvin, you got your sort of Renaissance humanism. There's always just been some kind of a dialogue or conversation between theology and philosophy. It's just that in the last 100 years or so, theology hasn't typically been conversing with as much analytic philosophy as it had been more like continental or hermeneutical philosophy. And yet within the last, call it 30 years or so, maybe 40 years, there's been a bit of an effort, both by philosophers and by theologians, to bring analytic philosophy and theology into a greater form of conversation.
Okay, that's helpful. So did you go into theology thinking this is kind of the method that I'm going to work with, or how did you run across this as sort of your some of the conversations you yourself want to have?
Yeah, personally, I mean, so I studied a bit of philosophy as an undergrad at Biola University, where analytic philosophy was just sort of the standard way of doing philosophy.
Okay.
And then when I came to theology, it was I kind of was reading kind of contemporary theology, and it just didn't quite sound the way I was familiar with. And did some work in like the medievals and scholasticism, which really has a lot of, I think, dovetails with contemporary analytic philosophy. And this was even though before analytic theology like had a name or anything like that. And so I kind of remember thinking, I'd love to do some theology. It was like in seminary, love to do theology, but I kind of would like to do it, like an analytic philosopher, so to speak, or like using that kind of clarity of language, precision of argumentation, and some of the tools in metaphysics and epistemology that I thought was kind of helpful as I looked at scripture, as I looked at the tradition, and as I tried to say something about God. And, thanks be to God in his providence, there were other people that were thinking similarly, and that is what kind of ended up emerging as analytic theology.
Okay, so one more kind of method question. Do analytic theologians, well, first of all, would you use that title to refer?
I mean, I don't know. I like to think of myself as a systematic theologian because that's a bit more general and vague. Yeah. And then, sometimes I borrow from the analytic philosophical tradition or what have you. So
I think you're already kind of answering my question.
Yeah. Because I was just going to say, like, for me, sometimes, like, I don't feel like I have to use analytic theology or analytic philosophy. I wrote an essay earlier this year where I don't think there was any analytic anything about it at all. And I was just trying to, like, say something about, about the topic at hand.
Yeah. So in other words, for people like you and others that contribute to and have an appreciation for analytic theology, it's not as though it's the end-all, be-all method. Is that fair to say? It's one study, one kind of like intellectual culture that you inhabit, but not to the exclusion of others. Is that fair?
I think our colleague Kevin Van Hooser once talked about it as being one tool in the toolbox. And I think that's kind of a helpful thing. So when I think about what I'm trying to do in theology, I'm trying to say something about God and God's revelation of himself in the world. And there's a lot of tools that I need to do that. I need to, do some exegesis. I got to know kind of the historical context of scripture. I might be in conversation with another historical figure, say a Calvin or an Aquinas or whomever. So I got to know a bit of the history. And, another tool might be philosophical analysis or attention to particular arguments or even particular metaphysical resources that even non-Christians have like thought of or deployed that might be helpful for that task. Nice, so I like that analogy there. It's like it isn't necessarily the only tool in the toolbox, but I think it's a helpful one for certain purposes.
Yeah, that's great. You also wrote recently had a book come out on the Eucharist, and I also saw the table of contents of the edited book, which goes through a lot of different major doctrines within the Christian tradition. So I don't want to make you don't have to use Eucharist as your example, but I'd love to see, is there a way you could articulate how analytic theology can help us understand the Eucharist or Scripture or the Trinity, or maybe those are big questions, but...
Yeah, sure. And that's kind of, one of our purposes, one of Dr. Turner and my purposes with the volume was to kind of pitch it as like, if you're doing theology, you're writing on a certain doctrinal topic and you're just kind of curious, is there something that analytic theology can bring to that topic? So kind of like the I don't know, archetypical reader or audience I kind of had in mind was like the seminary student, the MDiv student, or even just like the scholar or whomever who is like, I'm working on a project on the Eucharist. Or I'm working on a project on baptism. I wonder if analytic theologians have said anything about that.
Right.
And I could, on the Eucharist, I could say, yeah, here's my essay. Here's a few things that analytic theologians have said, or those who do analytic theology or whatever we call them, have said about the doctrine of the Eucharist. And I mean, then specifically on that, from my own research, when you look at the history of the conversation on the Eucharist, there is a ton of philosophy going on in there, whether you're dealing with like philosophy of language, what kind of an is it when Jesus says, this is my body, or you're doing metaphysics when you're talking about the locations of bodies or the presence of bodies or the properties of bodies. You're talking about epistemology at times because we're thinking about how do we understand an utterance like this, especially when it seems a little bit non-standard to say a piece of bread is a human body or what have you. So the tradition has just long, I think, been engaging in philosophically charged or philosophically infused conversations on the Eucharist. And my book, which came out in 2018, and then this essay too, where I get kind of constructive, is just trying to fall in that same tradition, but maybe use some more kind of contemporary philosophical resources to do that same kind of work of making clear or trying to understand what does Jesus mean when he says, this is my body of a piece of bread, and what do ministers mean when they do the same thing Sunday by Sunday in church contexts. Yeah. So there's a little bit of like I guess how I kind of see it, kind of a clarification project. Here's kind of something that's kind of unclear in Scripture, unclear in the tradition. It's got a lot of options here. Can I come in here and help out to kind of clarify a bit what is going on here, even just what might be going on, as particular options for how we can understand this practice.
What I feel as though there are sometimes, as one who's outside of analytic theology, sometimes there's strong resistance to analytic theology more than what maybe I've seen in terms of some other methods or disciplines. I'm curious, is there any maybe myth about analytic theology you'd like to bust, or any maybe misperception that you find yourself having to, and other analytic theologians have to counter frequently and say, that's not actually what we're doing, or that's not quite fair?
Yeah, the ahistorical objection. Okay. So I think oftentimes I hear, and never published, but more just kind of like whispered or tweeted, perhaps, maybe even, something like, well, analytic theologians are ahistorical, and they just like take some sentences and start logic chopping them and just kind of like, put it out there and say, I'm kind of done with it. That's a bit of a caricature, but that's sometimes kind of how the allegation goes. And I think that there have been certainly instances where you do have just like an analytic philosopher who's like, hey, Christians say something kind of weird, like God is 3 in 1. How can we just like logic chop that up or what have you? I think that has happened. I think that especially now is more the minority. That doesn't happen that often. Okay. And when you look at, I think a lot of the early and then even present, like people who are engaged in what we would call now analytic theology, they're thoroughly saturated with historical studies. I'm thinking some of my heroes like Eleanor Stump or Marilyn McCord Adams or Richard Cross. I mean, they were just medievalists even, thoroughly saturated in their understanding of a particular time period and engaging in philosophical analysis in the spirit of those same thinkers. And so with a keen sense of the historical context. Or my friend Tim Paul, whose book I mentioned in our foreword, forward reads sort of a thing there. Yep. Yeah, exactly. He's doing a lot of the councils, the ecumenical councils, and their statements on Christ. And I think it's just really, really good historical reconstruction of some of the key issues that are going on in the time period. He certainly may not be doing a whole book on like the socio-political aspects of things, but in terms of understanding these councils and the statements that came out of them in their historical context, I think is a very sensitive reader of the history as well. So that's an objection that I think that is done away with if you just do a bit more reading of analytic theology. And I think that our volume will show that, will demonstrate that, that an accusation like people who do analytic theology are ahistorical, that's rather unfounded.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's really helpful. Well, it's been fun to catch up with you, James. Congratulations on the project. It's finished now. It sounds like off to the publisher.
Yeah, I mean it's off to the publisher's hands right now. I think I think that it's off to the typesetters and that kind of a thing. And so hopefully we'll get proofs back later on here this summer. I think we've got a January 2021 release date right now, as it's indicated on the website, the Bloomsbury website. So hopefully we'll be able to stick with that as long as COVID cooperates with production schedules and everything else. Cool,
that's great. And then start getting rich.
Is that how that goes?
Yeah, right. The royalties, of course.
Yes, right.
That's how it works out for me. I mean, it's just rolling in cash. Just
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, I think one of my seminary professors talked about every year with the royalties from his book, he bought a pizza.
Yeah. No, I have one right now where it's like they don't send. It has to be $50 or more for Brill at least to send a check. And for the last few years, I get a notice that's like, we can't send you a check yet. So.
build them there. Still building, right?
Come on, somebody buy one.
Yeah.
Well, fun to catch up with you, James.
Yeah, cool, Josh, and you too as well. Looking forward to hearing more updates on your project and your research as it comes as it comes forward. If you will.
I won't be hard to find. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And that's just the foreword. We're so grateful that you all were joining with us today in our conversation about some of our research and writing. We'll look forward to continuing the conversation on Twitter and Facebook and all those places where we're able to engage with you listeners as we all look forward to our coming season in the fall. So I'm grateful to Josh Jipp for being part of this conversation. We're grateful to Madison, Michelle, our co-hosts, who obviously aren't with us, but are certainly supporting and participating in our activities this summer as well. We're thankful to Lauren Januzik, who's our assistant with various aspects of things, and to Curtis Pierce, our producer, who is ever steady at the hand of production and all things that go into this podcast. Thanks very much, everybody.
Forward is a podcast hosted by faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You can subscribe to our newest episodes on your preferred podcast app or at forwardpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Forward Podcast to get updates and additional links to content. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is located 25 miles north of Chicago, with extension sites across the country and online. Trinity educates men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. You can find more information at teds.edu.